All right, we're going to go ahead and start now. My name is Bill Martin. I have the pleasure and the privilege to direct the drug policy program here at the Baker Institute, and welcome you. And I know that we have a good many people who couldn't get here but are going to be watching the streaming video of the program in other cities. So for all our sick and shut in out there in internet land, we welcome you as well. And before we start the program tonight, which I think you're really going to enjoy, I want to tell you a little bit about our drug policy program here and introduce to you some of the key people. First of all is Nathan Jones. Here's you can go ahead and stand up here. Nathan is the Alfred C. Glassell III postdoctoral fellow in drug policy, and this is Nathan's second year with us, and he's really been tremendous. If you'll go on our website, you'll see, for example, the Viewpoint series, and here Nathan has gathered all of them at least printed, and also video for some of these, where we have 4 or 5 people talking about different kinds of issues. Should marijuana be legalized? Aspects of medical marijuana. Several are related to Mexican drug trafficking, strategies to deal with the cartels and related violence, and border security, and other topics. Also about the prescription drug epidemic and jury nullification. Nathan has a book now based on his dissertation under review at Georgetown about the Tijuana cartels and his research that he did on that. He will be leaving us soon for Sam Houston State University and the College of Criminal Justice there, and we will seriously miss him. Nathan has meant a tremendous amount to our program, but he's going to be staying on as a non-resident associate, and we're a scholar, and we're really pleased at that, and we plan to stay in touch with him closely. I also want to introduce Dean Becker, who is a Baker Institute research associate, a non-resident. Dean, for a number of years now, what is it, 20 years? 15 years. 15 years. Dean has interviewed more than 600 people for his radio programs that started out on Pacifica here, but now are carried on 90 different stations. And he has more than 600 of interviews of all sorts of people: judges, police people, former police people. He's scientists, doctors, physicians, patients, providers. And all of these are also on our website, with transcripts for most of the recent ones. So it is a rich resource. It's called the Drug Truth Network, and his goal is to share what he calls the unvarnished truth with enough Americans to bring the current drug policy of prohibition to an end. Dean also, as a former policeman, he serves as a speaker for the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. He's a board member of the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. And Dean has a new book out too, called To End the War on Drugs, a guide for politicians, the press, and public, which consists of excerpts from the interviews that he's done with more than 100 people. And it's really, and he just told me that he had sent a copy to Attorney General Holder, among others, and that he got that General Holder sent a copy to the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, and said, you need to read this, and that they had responded to him and said, we're looking it over. We'll see what they think. But we're very proud of this. And this is available from Amazon, and worth your attention. And also, since we're talking about the Drug Policy Forum of Texas, Jerry Epstein, who is a Rice alum, and the president of the Drug Policy Forum of Texas, and he and I have collaborated on things that we are looking forward to seeing in print soon. For this evening, this program is underwritten, being made possible by the generous gift from Louis and Lucia Brandt here. Thank you for that very much. Our programs here, most of the programs at the Baker Institute, despite the fact that it is well endowed. The individual programs depend on the support of our friends. So we appreciate that very much, and the rest of you, our operators, are standing by. Now I want to introduce to you our speaker for this evening, Doug Fine. You have much of his bio in your program there, so I'm not going to go over all of it, but he spent his young years on Long Island and then college at Stanford. In his 20s, he worked on 5 continents in such locations as Burma, Rwanda, Laos, Guatemala, and Tajikistan as a roving reporter for the Washington Post, Salon, U.S. News and World Report, NPR, and other media outlets. He's written several books. One is Not Really an Alaskan Mountain Man, when he wrote about living in a one-room cabin in a remote part of Alaska in the winter of 1998, and perhaps that's why it's called Not Really a Mountain Man. He's written Farewell My Subaru. He's trying to prove that it's easy being green if you work at it hard enough. He and his family live as much as possible off of the grid in a solar-powered Funky Boot Ranch in southern New Mexico. And his 2 most recent books, which are going to be the subject of our discussion tonight, are Too High to Fail, which talks about the economic promise as well as other aspects of medicinal and recreational cannabis, and Hemp Bound, which talks about the possibility that industrial, non-psychoactive cannabis may be an even greater economic boon than the psychoactive strain. These books have sold well. They've been reviewed in glowing terms, and his writing has been compared to Bill Bryson and Douglas Adams. That's pretty high praise. They will be on sale after the program, and I encourage you to pick one up. So I want to welcome Doug Fine, whom I've enjoyed really getting to know in person since yesterday evening and today, to talk about Cannibinomics, the impact of cannabis and hemp on America's economy and public safety. Doug?
Very nice introduction.
Get these out of your way here.
Thank you so much. By way of thanking Dr. Martin and the Institute and the sponsors and Rice, I feel I have to make a quick Texas joke and I can do it because I'm a we're neighbors. We're all Western rancher types here. For people not in the know, to inform them that, let's say, editors of mine in Washington, D.C. or somewhere, that I'm coming to Houston, let's say, to generalize, and speaking about drug policy, it would be like, to that mindset, Governor Perry going to a Vermont town council to pitch fracking. That's my Texas joke. But we all here know better, and I think Texans know better. We were talking today, Bill was talking to me, very high percentage of Texans are on what I think from years of field research is the right side of history, which is that we have to make major changes to drug policy worldwide. I'm just back from testifying at the United Nations about it. And the Institute itself, you look at the drug policy section of the Baker Institute website, and it is the repository for really fantastic information about drug policy, especially, well, not especially, but including issues across south of the border, which are of great impact to my family. And I'm going to start with that and explain why I started writing about drug policy. Tonight, I'm really going to be speaking about 2 separate topics. I'm going to be talking about psychoactive cannabis and its future impact on the economy and public safety, and then switching to my new topic that I'm really excited about on the hemp side. So I'm compacting 2 talks into one shortened one. So if at any point I'm skipping over slides or you see something that you want to talk about, we'll have a Q&A afterwards, and I'll be delighted to address them afterwards. Why I got into drug policy is basically about this. We're the land of the free, and as a result of the modern drug war since 1971, I'll not make any assumptions here tonight. I know many folks will know some of this background info, but I'll briefly go over the background information. The modern war on drugs started about 1971, although cannabis was originally criminalized on the federal level in 1937. Interestingly, Southwest region is where the tactics of the drug war had their roots. In Arizona and California, there were some tensions between Latino and Anglo sort of power circles. And to try and sway public opinion, the first of the sort of reefer madness propaganda was spread, not against, as it would later be, against African-American jazz musicians in the East Coast press and in Washington, D.C., but against Latinos allegedly, you know, coming up from Mexico to seduce blonde women in Arizona and California. And that was co-opted by Harry Anslinger, the first head of the Bureau of Narcotics, who had recently lost his job running alcohol prohibition when we learned as a society that that didn't work, decided to try it with this other plant that humans have been using even longer than alcohol. So it hasn't worked out very well. The modern war on drugs declared by Richard Nixon in 1971 resulted in the formation of the DEA and now costs us billions of taxpayer dollars every year to almost no effect. The worst side effect, to my view, has been we've become incarceration nation, and I'm sure this is not news to anybody here, but we do have significantly more people in prison today in the land of the free than China, and we put $1 trillion into it to almost no impact on supply and demand. Most of the effort goes towards the, by far, the least dangerous today illegal drug, which is cannabis. So I had a number of personal events that got me interested in this topic. My family likes to go hike in the Copper Canyon in Chihuahua State, Mexico, just a few hours south of our ranch. And to sort of gloss over a very sad and graphic story, you all know about 80,000 Mexicans killed here in the last few years, essentially in a drug war. This sleepy, sleepy place that we go to as a family for years just became, as a result of mass murders, or as it was announced to locals, middle management business takeovers. Too dangerous for my family to visit there anymore. So that was sad. It made drug policy on my short list. Then, one morning, I live on a very quiet ranch, as Bill is so kind to mention, farewell my Subaru. It's hummingbirds fluttering in the theater outside my window is my alarm clock most days. One day a few years ago, it was like the final scene out of the movie Goodfellas. It was helicopters, it was a few circling airplanes, and about 50 guys in SUVs and earpieces trying to look inconspicuous in a creek bed that normally only has, you know, coyotes and bobcats. And at first I thought I was in trouble for criticizing the governor's view on fracking, but then I realized it was my retiree AARP member, totally clean criminal record neighbor, who was cultivating a few cannabis plants for self-medication just prior to New Mexico's implementation of its very successful medical cannabis program. And it was PTSD from his military time, and trust me, I mean, he's not an easy neighbor. He's got issues, and he chose a plant over pharmaceuticals, and someone turned him in. And the result was a huge amount of our taxpayer dollars that are supposed to be, you know, fighting criminal enterprises, went to haul this elderly fellow off to a processing facility at El Paso where his lawyer was waiting, and more taxpayer dollars were wasted. He didn't spend a moment in jail, not that he should have, for whatever it was, 13 plants. I believe today he's an official cultivator for the state of New Mexico program. It was a terrible incident to put my family at risk. Automatic weapons in the creek bed, that's not okay for me. Over a plant. Especially, he wasn't even distributing it, you know, it was personal medicinal use. So that raised it a little bit higher, drug policy a little higher on my list for what I wanted to write about. And then the clincher, as I have mentioned here, and big thanks to Kevin and the tech folks for getting me so well set up here. So Columbus, New Mexico, an American town, the mayor, you may have read about this, the mayor of a US town was a card-carrying member of a criminal organization south of the border in Juarez. And his job was to supply American weapons to facilitate the killing south of the border and the power struggles and still going on. This went on unimpeded by the Interagency Border Narcotics Task Force that took down my neighbor for years until the guy slipped up. And I forgot what he got. I think something like 60 months in prison, the mayor got. And that was the final straw for me, because say what you will about drug policy or your personal view of cannabis or anything else, that is not where our our taxpayer dollars should be going for small home cultivators of cannabis versus real criminals. And the real criminals are created by prohibition of cannabis in the first place. The Institute here has done a lot of good work on just how much of south of the border criminal enterprises income comes from cannabis. And you hear wide ranges, but even on the relatively low end of 30%, I would personally not like to lose 30% of my income. The argument that I sometimes hear from those opposed to changing drug policy is that criminal enterprises have diversified, and they're in everything from real estate. I read it recently, they're in, was it limes, like the big Mexican lime market or something like that? That's true, and it's a lesson we should have learned from alcohol prohibition, because the alcohol prohibition basically created organized crime in North America. And by the time it was over, you know, a few decades later, we had Vegas and other issues like that. But it's still time to end it. So 80% of Americans agree with me on this. And I'm not by nature, or as a journalist, someone who just likes to whine about problems. I want to look for solutions. And in writing what became Too High to Fail, I wanted to find a place that was actually implementing what I shorthand as the drug peace, and investigate whether it was successful or not. And one other element I have to mention comes from my sustainability life. You know, I drive on vegetable oil, the ranch is solar powered, and I really think about these things, sourcing where my clothes comes from. Before I forget to mention this, my girlfriend made this hemp shirt. Now, unfortunately, it's Chinese-grown hemp for now, because we're not quite up to commercial cultivation in the US, but we're getting there. I'll show you some photos from a US hemp farm in a little while. So sustainability was a big factor to me. This might be a little bit nuanced for some folks, but just in case anybody is interested in the cannabis industry, and when, not if, it comes to Texas, indoor cultivation requires an awful lot of energy use, and there are some people who tell me that actually indoor cannabis cultivation is doomed after federal prohibition comes to an end, because the pesticides and other additives often involved in indoor cultivation, the runoffs violate the Clean Water Act. So outdoor cultivation, which in a lot of Texas is certainly possible, is much kinder to the earth, uses a lot less energy. So that was a factor that I was thinking about, not the only factor. So I found what I was looking for in Mendocino County, California, part of the famous Emerald Triangle in northern coastal redwoods, beautiful area. The first county in the US to ban genetically modified organisms by popular vote. The sheriff has raided GMO corn crops and cut them down in Mendocino County. It's a place so progressive, if it were any more progressive, it would be clothing optional in the supermarket. It's really a place culturally that for several decades has been it's effectively a 100% cannabis economy. It has some well, I'll give you the stats. The wine industry officially is $78 million per year to the county, not bad, 80,000 people. On paper, one of the poorest counties in California. Conservatively, and I'll tell you how I got the number, Bill was curious about this as well. Conservatively, cannabis brings untaxed and unregulated $6 billion just to this one county every year. Here's where the number comes from. In 2010, authorities seized 600,000 cannabis plants in Mendocino County alone, all combined law enforcement, federal, state, et cetera. A very low estimate for the per plant value is $1,000 per plant. So if you're assuming, and by the way, that 10%, it's way high by almost everyone's, it probably was more like 1%, but we'll go high and say it was 10% of the crop, roughly 6 million plants to market at a very, very low $1,000 value per plant. That's the conservative $6 billion figure. Did that get across? I know I'm speaking fast because I have so much to talk about, but happy to elucidate further on that. And it's also just part of the culture. The Medical Marijuana Patients Union does the highway cleanup. These are just, a vegetable garden with 3 or 4 of these big bushy sativa branch plants. Cannabis, psychoactive cannabis, broadly speaking, comes as cannabis sativa, tropical varieties. That's what people in the US were smoking in the 60s, largely from Mexico, but it's also what, 3,000-year-old Moroccan hashish makers make in Morocco. Hawaii is sativa. And Indica is more bushy and it comes from the Hindu Kush region. And the reason why it got incorporated when cannabis prohibition became incorporated, it's America's #1 cash crop. Particularly in the 1980s, it was discovered that these varieties grow a lot better indoors in controlled conditions, which is easier to evade law enforcement from aerial surveillance, which, trust me, from researching one full season, which is what I did for Too High to Fail, Valentine's Day through harvest in November in Mendocino County in 2011, the summer soundtrack is helicopters overhead. That's where your taxpayer dollars are going up there, is these flyovers. So these are the two strains, the two general varieties, rather. There's many strains within them, and a lot of them are hybrids. I went into my research very skeptical that one plant could have such a diverse array of medicinal effects, which is what people, of course, claim about cannabis. And I came away a believer mainly through speaking to patients, everyone from veterans to seniors, trying to reduce their pharmaceutical counts for everything from glaucoma to arthritis to appetite increasing for cancer treatment. And it really is true that this one plant, certain varieties of it, certain strains, for some people, have an energizing, appetite-inducing effect. For some, it has spasmosity reduction, and for some, extreme sleep aid and stress release, musculature relief for people in extreme pain from war wounds or whatever it is. So Sheriff Tom Allman, kind of the hero of Too High to Fail. He was, a few years ago, kicking down people's doors, you know, get down on the floor. Sometimes dogs would get shot and terrified children and all that jazz. And he was informed by the Board of Supervisors, tough times for everyone, that he had to reduce 18% of his force. Budget cutbacks, and that was untenable for him because there hadn't been an increase since 1972 in the number of people on the street. And he said, we have real problems in this county, poverty, domestic violence, especially alcohol abuse, prescription abuse. And he went down the list. He said, cannabis isn't even in the top 10. He grew up there. He's a local boy. He knows what the economy is. So he did a very brave thing. He went to the Board of Supervisors and he said, he's a registered Republican, he said, we've got to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. And I think he actually called it the T-Rex in the room. And regulate this plant. And if you let me try this for a year without making me do the layoffs now, I will raise the $500,000 that you say I have to get out of my budget, and I'd like to use that to keep my deputies. And the Board of Supervisors laughed at him. Kendall Smith, one of the supervisors, famously told him that he was living a pipe dream, and pun intended, and you know, was going to get laughed out of a career. And skipping ahead to the end of the story a little bit, the zip tie program, as it was named, because it allowed farmers to register, pay for, and tie kind of those yellow truck repair zip ties around up to 99 plants per farm. It didn't raise the $500,000 he said it would. It raised $600,000 in its first year. He gave a $100,000 tip to the county. It was an environmentally sustainable, it was a locavore program where closed loop, meaning that the farmers had to document every single flower, which is what the market is for cannabis these days, where it was going. They were nonprofit models, collectives and cooperatives, so there was not, you know, there were salaries, but not immense profits taken. I always make that point with a little bit of hesitation because, you know, have you looked at what some of our healthcare executives, legitimate pharmaceutical healthcare executives make in salaries per year? So I don't know why we immediately have to assume that American entrepreneurs utilizing a free market, especially organically grown medicine, should be demonized for the idea of profits. But believe me, these folks that came on board were brave. The people that gave me their names for Too High to Fail could still be federally rated at any time. You know, it's still on. The laws haven't changed it. It seems like they have because they're going to, but they haven't yet. This is the photo I always like to send to media. Randy Johnson, no relation, as you can see, to the all-star pitcher, was another just say no guy. Knew nothing about cannabis, but he was very honest cop. He had run internal affairs for a long time. He said he was off the Christmas list within the department because he was hard on other cops that weren't doing their job right. I myself am a big law enforcement supporter, and you know, and Randy would say most cops are good, but if they were bad, I'd go after them. So Sheriff Tom put him in charge of the program, and he immediately became a huge supporter. He said, these are just farmers, why aren't we taxing them? And he really liked Thomas, who's the son of a Hungarian refugee from the Soviet invasion in 1956. His father told him, do what you believe in. This is the land of the free. And this is, Thomas feels this is his calling. His real name, all his financial records are in Too High to Fail. And there is the plant that I followed from farm to patient of Thomas's with its zip tie on it. It was quite an amazing program. That's Thomas's farm. They had a GPS-connected ID so that the summer soundtrack I was telling you about, the helicopters, wouldn't raid the farms that were certified in the program. And it was an unmitigated success. Sheriff Tom was a rock star because he broke down that Berlin Wall, and all the other law enforcers in the region, all over California in fact, were ready to follow in his footsteps. Are you kidding me? Generate revenue, and I don't have to throw people in jail for basically the economic driver anymore. You know, it was he was giving tours and speeches all over the state. And unfortunately, a few days before harvest, one of the most prominent farmers, he had been an organic vegetable farmer prior to joining the zip tie program. 6 a.m., he described it as a dozen federal DEA agents. And for DEA folks and other law enforcement here today, understand, I know everybody in law enforcement is doing their job, and I honor it and respect it. I just am sad that these are the targets. An open, tax-paying guy who just wants to bring the industry above ground gets raided at 6 a.m. Machine guns blazing was his term. His wife, Courtney, describes it as texting the employees not to come in, don't come in, raid. Matt runs down, pulling on his clothes, yelling, you know, don't shoot the dogs, don't, and he has goats too, which makes their family even closer in my heart, since this is rare. I'm normally, at this time of night, I'm normally milking goats myself. Anyway, so they came and they chopped down all his plants, took him away. I have some funny interviews with public affairs, DEA public affairs, about where the plants go and what happened to him. And that's the last. That's the last. He and his 3,300 patients, including this liver cancer patient. So Diane and Bill Harney were Sonoma County patients that agreed to let me sort of into their personal life. And of all the weird stuff that happened to me during the course of researching this book and being around a lot of raids and law enforcement, this was the most awkward for me, because you're having a guy that's some days can eat, some days can't. And Diane was a severe debilitating arthritis is her deal. And it was really interesting to follow their medical stories, because everything they're doing is with the full recommendation of their doctors. They require 2 completely different strains because their needs are totally different. But when I asked Bill why he came to cannabis, he said his oncologist told him he had to. He was down under 100 pounds and he had no appetite. And I saw him, and he said it was 7 months later, and he was like 143 pounds, and you wouldn't know he was sick. So obviously, we make fun of the munchies, right? We make fun of what cannabis does to us, but in some cases it can be life-saving. Interestingly, the strain that I followed was a Mendocino County developed strain that worked really well in the local soil that Thomas grew, and he donated it to these guys after his friend Matt got raided. These were members of Matt's, the fellow who was raided, his collective. And so Thomas went and signed him up according to the rules of the zip tie program. They live in a senior subdivision in Sonoma County. And interestingly, the strain was developed by a sort of Gregor Mendel of Mendocino County, who's famous for doing 4 or 5 strains that are widely distributed on the California market, which is amazing. If you think about it, a Monsanto researcher has his or her hand in 1 or 2 things over the course of a career and is considered a success. And this fellow just crossing genes and seeing what happens in his barn has had a lot of success. And this particular strain called Kashmir Kush that he let's see if I can get this. I'm losing my laser pointer here. Whoops. There we go. There we go. So you can see the flowers there. Intentionally wanted to develop this. Gregor Mendel's name was Rock. He wanted to develop a strain that was it had the sort of pain reduction qualities that we were talking about in an indica, and that Hindu Kush developed bushier strain, but didn't give people what he described as couch lock. Now, I've been to college, so I'd never heard that term, but I get what he meant. The couch lock is two guys sitting in front of the big game, Rice playing, what, UT in baseball tomorrow? Sitting in front of the big game on the TV, and one guy looking over at the other guy and saying, "Hey man, it's commercial, pass the remote." Silence for 10 minutes. Then the first guy again looks down in his hand, looks over at the second guy and says, "Never mind, I got it." That's couch lock. So, and the indicas are famous for doing this to you. Sativas are different. Sativas, watch the Woodstock documentary. That's sativas, right? The point of the strain was so that professionals, the way Rock described it is, I don't want my doctor who has arthritis or glaucoma himself or herself to be zonked out and out of control on some pharmaceutical. That's unsafe. That's unsafe for drivers. He was trying to counter the danger of America's real epidemic, which is pharmaceutical abuse, by making a strain that would have a pain-killing quality but would not make people lose kind of mental function. And interestingly, it worked in terms of giving Bill the munchies, but it didn't work well enough for Diane's arthritis because her use is ingest a little bit of cannabis, and by the way, forget about smoking joints and anything that you may have seen. The delivery methods in the 21st century, tinctures, edibles for people that don't want to inhale smoke, vaporizers, burn at a very much lower level. So issues associated with smoking are on their way out vis-a-vis cannabis as well. In any event, what Diane said is she wants couch lock because she wants to ingest what she considers a pure indica before bed just to reduce the pain enough so that she could close her eyes and get some rest. So it was not the right strain for her that I followed. I remember earlier that was the actual plant that I followed. We named it Lucille after an initially belligerent neighbor of Thomas's who later came around to be a big booster of his efforts. A UC Davis, University of California Davis professor, chemistry professor, who just wants to end the war on drugs, no connection to cannabis industry, formed this nonprofit that comes and tests cannabis for the zip tie program, and tests for things you don't want, like molds, pesticides, et cetera, and for things that you do want. Many people here have heard of THC. Just out of curiosity, how many folks have heard of CBD? For those who haven't, it's another of the now 100 plus known cannabinoids that are in the plant, and I'll just mention it briefly since we have other things to talk about, that we're just scratching the surface on our knowledge about this plant. And it's my belief, from just a little bit of knowledge about, say, Chinese herbal medicine, that when you're talking about an herb, a natural source is really what you're looking for, because there's a broad profile of elements in the plants. Not in the case of cannabis, not just the cannabinoids, but things like terpenes, bioflavonoids, things like that. So I'm a little bit loath to turn over to the pharmaceutical industry patents on certain cannabinoid combinations, because in truth, it's a much bigger story than that. And I'd be satisfied, I'm happy to allow pharma in, I'm happy to allow cores in if they want. But everybody must be allowed to access and or cultivate cannabis for their medicinal needs because of the sheer variety of the genetics of this plant that we've been interacting with for 8,000 years. But the Hallent labs, as they were called, would come down and test all the plants for the zip tie program and list maybe about 12 of the cannabinoids and what ratios they had. Let's see, there was one other slide I wanted to. This is, by the way, why $1,000 is a low estimate. This is a 10-pound plant, and wholesale levels at their lowest for farmers during a big glut of 2010 were $2,000 a pound. So that's a, am I doing my math right? 10 pounds, 2,000 pounds, that's a $20,000 plant right there. And I gave you an estimate of $1,000 a plant. That's why my $6 billion figure was conservative. That's a pure indica, pure tree-like tropical plant, and that's a sativa rather, and that's an indica, a bush-like plant. So one other slide I passed over quickly. Oh, just to show you, the cannabinoids are largely embedded in these crystalline trichomes that grow on the plant's flower. That's why essentially we have a drug war right there, is because American know-how has created very high quality cannabis. It's not dangerous, by the way. Nobody's ever died from it. Some questions that we may want to address later on is, do you see an increase in use? Very briefly on that as a father, I happen to have a very positive view of the cannabis plant when used responsibly by adults. In social situations, I believe we have a safer America when cannabis substitutes for alcohol in social situations because it doesn't induce violence and it's not as dangerous on the roads. That said, as a father, I want to, of course, see youth use rates go down. In truth, I think that's mostly my job and my sweetheart's job. Nonetheless, if you want to go to the studies, I don't know any study that said otherwise, but two that I know of out of New England, Brown University study of medical cannabis states, and a Portuguese study, as many of you know, they've decriminalized all drugs there. Both of those studies showed decreases in youth use rates with legalization. The gateway drug thing is totally false and fake. Things that we need to address as a society are how to deal with safety on the roads, what if you're a pilot or a teacher, and these are legitimate issues of discussion that I think are easily translatable to alcohol. And I think that is close to all I wanted to say, other than, and we'll talk about this with hemp as well, this is not a left-wing, limp-wristed, revolutionary issue, in my view. In my view, this is a patriotic issue. We need to start taxing and regulating this plant for public safety and to reduce crime. Now, Thomas, who went out to protest in the streets of Sacramento after his friends got raided here in this program that was completely locally supported. The sheriff came to Matt Cohen's birthday party a few days before the DEA raided him. I always promised to give him the last word on this topic because he really is putting his freedom on the line by being so forthcoming and allowing me to go around the world and tell his story. And he's not trying to be a millionaire. He's been in it far too long for it to be a get-rich-quick scheme for him. He just wants to be a farmer and taxpayer of America's #1 cash crop. So if I could, I was going to switch to hemp right now. Great. Let's see if I can figure this out. Normally, that's my big finish there with Thomas. And I'll say, I'll take questions. But this is the first time I really get to talk about hemp. I've just finished this project, and the book's not even officially out till, I'm embarrassed to say this, until 4/20. That was my publisher's decision. For those who don't get the joke, in cannabis culture, there's a lot of rumor and legend about where this 420 thing came from. But at 4:20 p.m., it's considered like the British have tea time. Cannabis aficionados will enjoy cannabis at 4:20. And the first I heard of it was in college. Allegedly, it was the code for cannabis smoking in progress in Marin County, California in the 1970s. But it's become codified because when California voters approved medical cannabis in Proposition 215 in 1996, right? I'm forgetting all my cannabis facts now that I'm switching to hemp. Some intern, when they had to write the law to codify the will of the people, filled in SB 420 as the name of the law, and that is the law of California for medical cannabis. So hemp, the difficulty for me in speaking about hemp is your roommate with the lava lamp was right. It really has an incredible amount of uses, and it really has a chance to help humanity in big ways. Most prominent among them for me is weaning from fossil fuels, so I'll kind of get to that since I know we're a teeny bit pressed for time. We're there already with hemp. How many people here, just out of curiosity, are aware that in this year's Farm Bill, hemp was essentially re-legalized in the U.S.? Yeah, so it was just for research purposes in states that allow it on the state level. But it's an important first step. The DEA was not happy about it. We spend millions of taxpayer dollars every year to eradicate the cultivars, as we call strains on the hemp side, the cultivars of hemp that Darwin showed are the most successful, namely the ditchweed that grows all over the Midwest. And there's absolutely no reason for hemp prohibition. This is Ryan Laughlin, a real patriot. There's going to be statues of this guy one day. He's a hero. He grew commercial crop of hemp last year, which was important for a few reasons. To see whether or not the DEA would raid him, they did not. And also because unfortunately, the Kentucky hemp, as it was colloquially known, all kinds of cultivars, it was the pride of the world. We were the world leaders in hemp. The first Lexington's first millionaire, 1838, came from hemp. All over Missouri, Wisconsin, it was a big crop for the U.S. That sort of accidentally got, in a sort of typo, got banned along with cannabis, effectively banned in 1937. Permits could be granted, but hardly ever were, except in 1942. Go to YouTube later and watch Hemp for Victory, a wonderful propaganda film that speaks the truth. It sounds like your roommate with a lava lamp, but it's the federal government saying, farmers, the Japanese conquered the Philippines. Notice the drug war was already exporting jobs offshore. Banned hemp in 37, then in 42 begging farmers to grow it because the Japanese captured our new source for the Navy. Needs tons and tons and tons of hemp rigging. Interesting trivia, President Bush Sr. Cord on the parachute that saved his life in World War II was hemp cord. So Ryan Laughlin was helping redevelop the seed stock. And it was an important thing that he did last season, and I was glad I got to visit him on a very conservative part of Colorado. And I'll tell you, these are people that believe President Obama was born in Mars, let alone, you know, Kenya. And I couldn't hear a voice against hemp in these towns. In any of the hemp research I did, farmers get it, that it's hemp's time again. So this is the thing I really want to focus on right here. Sorry about the laser pointer going a little bit. In Germany and Austria today, entire communities have become energy independent through a carbon-friendly biomass combustion process called gasification. It can be done on the farm level to make your ranch energy independent, or it can be fed back into a grid, or it can make a community energy independent. And in Germany and Austria, all of those models are being implemented, not with hemp yet, at least not exclusively. They do grow hemp in Europe, but with any farm waste. So we actually have some lucky components of hemp prohibition, which is that the Canadians have this billion-dollar hemp seed oil market. I put it in my family shake every morning. It's a fantastic omega-balanced oil. The Europeans and Chinese make the fiber. Hemp today goes into BMW and Mercedes door panels because it's such a strong fiber and it's cheap and easy to acquire. And I want to see in our Generation 1 processors, not just fiber and seed applications. By the way, 10 times the profits Canadians are making today over wheat and corn on their hemp seed, mainly for sale to our insatiable health food market in the US. It is truly a superfood. I researched university studies on it and visited some in person in Manitoba, and it's the real deal as far as nutrition. So you've got your hemp seed oil, you've got your fiber, but the third thing I want to see is these compact energy processing for the otherwise unusable cellulose stalks, and it's a real practical way basically to get off of coal and other fossil fuels in the US. That is actually fiber coming off in the Netherlands, fiber coming off the conveyor belt at a factory and going over to BMW and Mercedes, are actually third parties that do their components. But it's really there, and it's not for political reasons. I mentioned Canada's industry is taking off. They can't plant the acreage. They can't plant enough acreage for American demand. Hempcrete, show of hands. Folks have heard of hempcrete? For those who haven't, it is any kind of hemp fiber. In other words, you don't have to take the kind of care that you do on the industrial components. You can just churn up the fiber, mix it with lime, and it makes an insulating and in some cases load-bearing, but especially insulating that compares favorably in performance to pink insulation, much more environmentally friendly and lower energy cost. I saw an entire hemp tractor. This is actually a car, and I just got the photo of the hemp tractor emailed to me today, not in time to get it into the slideshow today, but this is a hemp car, entirely made from locally grown hemp fiber in Canada. The Canadians are trying to figure out what to do with the fiber. Today they just burn it in the fields. And so they built these tractor and car prototypes completely out of hemp. And I was kicking these things. They're extremely strong, they're lighter, and there's magnitudes less energy embedded in making it than in petroplastic, and you don't need the toxins and the petroleum to go into it. So it's kind of win-win. That's the researcher Simon Potter at Canada's government-funded Composites Innovation Center there. And I said, why hemp? And he said, no choice. We're running out of petroleum. So there's Ryan in his field. And by the way, this is not small-time, you know, hippies collectively cutting down things with scythes. Ryan Laughlin and his family grow on thousands of acres, and when I talked to Sean Crew, who runs, he's like Canada's big seed oil processing magnate, he's like the Rockefeller of Canada's hemp seed oil industry. I said, well, on my 40 acres, if I want to grow hemp, and he said, but, talk to the hand, you're not a real hemp farmer unless you do more than 1,000 acres. This is a real crop. Tell people they need to be professionals. I took that and noted it, and I'm telling you, but it's also, others have told me otherwise, because in truth, if I were to grow 30, 40 acres of hemp, I could produce enough seed oil to feed not just my family, but my livestock as well. And potentially, my sweetheart could be making these clothes from homegrown hemp. So if you want to make it a business, and you want to make the $300 per acre profit that Canadian farmers are making, you might want to have 1,000 acres or more. The issue now is rebuilding which cultivars are better for what purpose. And so this was a Belgian hemp farm I visited. And really, all over the world, there's hemp cultivars that the savvy American farmer in Illinois would do well to match latitude, longitude, altitude, moisture, and figure out what works. The other thing is, please, DEA, allow us to import these seeds now that Congress has legalized the plant. We've got a real dust bowl going in many parts of the U.S. This is supposed to be a wheat field in eastern Colorado. Another great quality of hemp is it has foot-long tap roots. It requires half the water of wheat, so it can be dry land, dry cropped in drought-ridden places. These are actual dust storms happening in Colorado. A lot of hemp applications. I was not a college lava lamp hempster guy. I'm a relatively recent convert. It began winning out in the marketplace when hemp diapers were the only thing that would survive those, you know, brutal wash, line dry in the Mexico desert sand that you have to do when you have kids. We're dealing with climate change issues. This is my creek bed, luckily not my vehicle, from a flood a couple of years ago. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of a solar guy. I don't want to, as much as I really love Nutiva, this hemp seed oil company that provides my family's hemp oil in the morning, I don't feel like paying $12 a bottle for a weed that I could press in my barn. So I'm looking forward to that, and to also feeding it. My goats are very eager for it in particular, as you can tell. And there's a long history of hemp. This shirt I'm wearing today, I just wore in speaking about cannabis and ending the international drug war at the United Nations last week. But the Japanese emperor's coronation is in hemp guard, the first Levi's. There just was a 9,000-year-old tomb with very good, well-preserved hemp clothing in Turkey, found a Stanford-led study. And fascinating, I went to the Hemp Museum giving a too high to fail talk. Went to the Hemp Museum in Amsterdam, and unbelievable that in The Hague, up until relatively recently, every judge was garbed in hemp. It's the real deal. The nutrition in eggs for hemp-fed chickens is higher than those in traditional animal feed. And I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Bronner's here. I'm not paid anything by the company, but hemp is associated with a brand, with a concept of righteousness. And obviously, as it comes online, we're going to eventually have the McHemp burger and giant McHemp conglomerates and all that jazz. But I urge us to support these companies that have been, Dr. Bronner's has had to sue the DEA multiple times to be allowed to import hemp. They only pay their, Dr. Bronner's, if you don't know them, they're a soap company, and hemp is one of the ingredients in their soap. They only pay their CEO 5 times more than their lowest paid worker. They're righteous people. David Bronner, it's a $58 million family-owned company that's growing a lot, and he went and chained himself in a cage in front of the White House last year with a hemp plant to demand what eventually happened, the legalization of hemp last year. Last year he was chainsawed out and arrested on the White, and this year he's law-abiding businessman. So that's the kind of, not necessarily endorsing them, although I love their soaps. I'm saying in addition to supporting the hemp industry for the good of humanity, support the companies that are beyond don't be evil, but actively trying to do good. There he is. And this is my friend Michael Bowman, who's another Colorado hemp farmer, just planting, and I wrote about him in Hempbound, bending, you know what that is? You guys know that? Yeah. Agriculture Secretary's ear. We've got some issues to face. I don't want to make it all sound rosy. The redding process, sorry. The redding process, which is what happens after hemp is harvested, it's pure medieval. It's the way humans have been doing it for 10,000 years. You leave the fiber in the field after harvest for weeks, rotating it at just the right temperature and moisture content. Otherwise, it either dries out or gets moldy and rotten. And there are solutions. There are decortication machines that help take care of it right after harvest. They're very expensive. They're in the prototype phase. But I just want to stress that, you know, it's not like tomorrow we're all going to be hemp millionaires. But the fact is, you grow a seed oil crop. If you were a farmer who's growing 1,000 acres today and you switch to hemp seed oil, your profits are going to go up. I can't promise you what prices are going to be 5 years from now, but they're very high right now. This is one of Betsy Ross's original flags made from hemp, and this was, again, thanks to Michael Bowman, the guy on the previous slide, a hemp flag going up over the Colorado Capitol and over the US Capitol last year. And I think that's pretty much, I think it's going to be bigger than psychoactive cannabis because Coors and Budweiser are big, but Exxon is bigger. And I think hemp is going to be bigger than psychoactive cannabis. You've got Mitch McConnell on board, as well as Earl Blumenauer from Oregon. There's not that many people opposing hemp. And if you want to hear more about it, this is where to find me. I'll take some questions. Thank you very much.
Did you find out any information about concentrations or concentrates, taking the cannabis and making, this is the psychoactive side?
Yes. Okay, so we were talking about post-smoking delivery methods. And so the question is making tinctures, making infusions of cannabis.
Yeah, is that the growing sector, I guess?
Hugely, especially for people who don't want to inhale smoke and or are too sick to. So I'm glad you asked that question because there's a lot of ways with this nascent industry. It can really start in the best of worlds or the worst of worlds. And when I was in California, there's a place called the California College of Herbal Studies in Sonoma. The kind of place that my MD brothers would really make fun of, right? But they talk about ways to render the active ingredients in herbs, all herbs, in organic, basically nice ways. If you must use alcohol for certain types of extractions, they use like this special kind of organic vodka, but glycerin and vegetable oil and other ways of rendering it that incidentally originally come from the anointing oil recipe in the Bible, in the Old Testament. That's the right way to do it, in my view, as a sort of a sustainability guy. But other ways, people use everything from naphthene, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, to butane. Essentially, these processing agents that get the active ingredients out wash out in the process. But I don't want something that comes from the hardware store in my grandmother's, pain medication. So yes, I did, and I recommend looking into places like the California College of Herbal Studies and or similar places if you're learning how to do it. That said, there's a bazillion movies on YouTube about how to render cannabis into a tincture, so you could probably find it in a 5 or 10 minute video as well. Yes.
Are there any organizations, websites that have identified pro-cannabis state legislators?
Good question. Are you specifically asking about Texas?
Well, that would be a good place
So,
to start.
Bill might be as informed as I am as well, but MPP, Marijuana Policy Project, I know is taking an active role. Is that a good answer here in Texas? Yeah, did you have something to say on that?
Kiki Friedman is running
yes.
for Commissioner of Agriculture on the Democratic ticket, and he is the also for legalization of hemp.
Yeah, that's his platform, is legalized cannabis and hemp for the good of Texas. Yeah, forgot about that, and he's in a runoff, if I'm not mistaken.
I can say just a little
Yeah,
bit
sure.
about that. In the last legislative session, there were several bills having to do with marijuana. They were timid bills, but several of these got to committee hearings where they had not done so before. And legislators, Elliot Neistat of Boston has regularly put forth a medical marijuana bill, and I think he'll probably be doing that again.
Dutton did the decrim.
That's right, Harold Dutton from Houston, and Sinfronia Thompson has been in favor of things of this sort. But anyway, there are several, and the MPP, Marijuana Policy Project, plans to put forth this year. They've got money for a lobbyist, and they're the head of the Marijuana Policy Project, Rob Campia, who has helped with Colorado, and he's helped draw up the laws for the different states, and has been a very successful activist. He's been living in Austin, and will be working on this. They believe they will have 3 strong bills, one for decriminalization, one for medical marijuana, and one for full legalization, that they plan to put forth before the legislature, and to get good legislators to do this. And they don't expect them to win this year, but they expect to make progress to get them before, so that in 2017 there may be a possibility for a decrim or a medical, and for 2019 their estimate is that more states now will have fallen into line. Colorado will not have gone to hell. Money will have kept coming in, and that they feel that by 2019 they will pass. But there's a growing number. What was impressive about the committee hearings this time was that nobody spoke against it, and some of the hearings last several hours. Nobody spoke against it. In some of the committees, nobody even registered against it. In one of the bills, the Department of Public Safety said they registered against it, but they weren't going to testify against it. So it was really different, and there were very conservative members of the committees who were saying, thank you to the sponsors. Thank you for bringing this bill forward. Thank you for testifying. To Ann and Bob Lee, who were there in the middle of the night.
For both of them.
For both of them testifying, and they are very staunch Republicans, and they organized Republicans against marijuana. Ramp Republicans against marijuana prohibition, and their conservative credentials are quite strong. But they were there, fully grown people.
It's in your 80s counts as fully grown. Fully grown. May I speak to this a minute?
I'm sure you will.
I have been so down on this because since 1990, I realized that marijuana was not the weed of the devil. And that my government could lie to me and do the propaganda against marijuana that it made a cynic out of me who loves my country. What we have done in this country is so horrible that we now have the new Jim Crow. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, shame on you. The Jim Crow that I grew up with in Louisiana was so bad that there was not even I'm not talking about segregated education, I'm talking about no high school education for blacks where I grew up. None. And now we have the new Jim Crow because of the drug war. And the people who are supporting the drug war love the money. Do you hear me? They love the money. And I don't care what MPP comes out with. If our legislators do not feel like they have somebody at home to support them, that's what we kept hearing. Oh, I like it, but how do I explain to my constituents? Our goal is, and you all hear me, our goal is for every state rep, 150 of them, to have 2 or 3 proponents in their district that they will hear from. If every state rep hears from somebody in their district, they're going to be out supporting them if they do it, and not supporting them if they don't. Because then that gives us 5 or 6 to every state senator. And that is the goal that those of us who are not the paid lobbyists, and Rod Campy, I know he can raise the money and can hire the people, but it's going to be us people who know the stories. Why are we having families leave Texas to go to Colorado with their children so they can get the medicine to control their seizures?
You may have seen Dr. Sanjay Gupta's special on CNN just recently where about this, and people are coming from different parts of the country. Back to it, on the new Jim Crow. Michelle Alexander's written a terrific book called The New Jim Crow. And it would be important for you to read that book, but a quicker version. She's a dynamic speaker. You can go to progressivehouston.org, an organization that is about to go out and they're kind of ceasing operations soon. I hope they keep the website up, but they've had a number of progressive speakers there, and I've heard Michelle Alexander speak on a number of times. I've never heard her do better than she did here in Houston. I recommend to you go to that and listen to her, and if, she will change your mind if you think this is a benign.
And echoing those thoughts on Texas and what we can do, I have been shocked as
Someone watching this full time, how fast change is coming in state level and federal level. I would not be surprised if it happens before 2019 in Texas. And people talk about California as sort of a harbinger of the rest of the nation, but Texas is the harbinger of the heartland. And right about now, states like Missouri, Wisconsin, and Illinois, Ohio, they're about, in public opinion polls, 52% on full legalization of social adult legalization of cannabis, higher than that on medical. If they see Texas, it's okay with Texas, you know? You really could be doing a good thing for your country if you take the advice here and not just wait for. I would do the research. MPP, another great organization, not necessarily so active in Texas, is Drug Policy Alliance. There's local organizations in Oregon, which is going to legalize this year. 73% support for. They're lucky they have the ballot initiative this November. It's already written and done, and it's going on the ballot. Their primary funding source was a local group called Sensible Oregon.
Normal does a lot that way, and we have a lady from Dallas, Joy Strickland, who formed Mothers Against Teen Violence, and she had a meeting this past Saturday. I wonder if anybody was there. This past Saturday in the Capitol, trying to get all the different organizations that had the same goal. We all have the same goal, and we need to just work together. And they've all taken on the idea we have to get, the state legislators have to have the protection at home, because for some reason they think that their constituents are going to come against them for supporting marijuana in any form.
Thank you for that. And let's call our legislators. There's only 150 of them.
Are there any early data out of Colorado to validate some of the beliefs as far as no increased violent crime, no increased driving under the influence, all the other concerns that people have?
The studies in Colorado are pretty much just underway now because it's so new. The one thing we can say about Colorado is it's far exceeding revenue projections. In a state of California's population, we're talking about billions in tax revenue. You know, it's just an incredible success. But I just read a study that and forgive me if the contact button on my website at dougfine.com goes right to me, so if you want to make sure I'm sending you the right study with the right stats. I can't remember if it's a study just of California or of a number of medical cannabis states, but in medical cannabis states, you're seeing alcohol-related crime and violence going down, as well as youth use rates as well. But in Colorado, all those kind of studies about whether or not people are substituting cannabis for alcohol and what effects that's having, they're not out yet because we're only a few months into retail sales.
It's the 6 states that have had it the longest.
Oh.
The study covered 6 full states that are the oldest.
Did you hear that? Yeah.
If we're going to have time for you to sell your books, it would be a good time. Just one thing about the representatives. We had a session right here on terrorism and border security, and Michael McCall, the representative, who is very conservative on these things. Someone at the end of his presentation, someone said, if we legalize drugs, do you think we'd have these problems in 10 years? And I thought, well, let's see what he's going to say. He said, that's a very fair question. I get asked it everywhere I go, and we need to have that conversation. So there is a greater openness. And another situation, I won't call the name because his chief of staff says, I'm not saying he's for this, but I think he would like to see, said, for me, I would like to have arguments and get it so he won't worry about getting primary. So there's an openness to being more open, if it could be. Thank you all so much. You will enjoy these books. Thank you for coming, and I hope you keep in touch with what we're trying to do here, and that you'll stay in touch with us and come back to the next meeting.
If you have more questions for me, I'll be outside, or you can email them to me.